Here we are again, and now we are going to talk about the presidency. We have made it all the way to module 8. Wow. This semester is this class is quickly winding down, isn't it? And I want to talk a little bit today about the presidency, what the presidency is, what the qualifications are, and how one might become a president. Would you like to be president someday? It is hard to imagine this job because the eyes of the world are upon you. You will be loved, you will be hated. You may be popular, you may be unpopular, but even no matter how popular you are, some people are going to hate you, and no matter how unpopular you are, some people are still going to love you. But popularity doesn't necessarily correlate with how presidents are viewed by history necessarily. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Abraham Lincoln, for instance, usually considered probably maybe perhaps the greatest president in U.S. history, was only popular really for the last few months of his presidency and of his life when the Civil War was winding to a close. Harry Truman was notoriously unpopular as president, but he's generally pretty well regarded today as president. So popularity alone doesn't necessarily determine how presidents are going to be viewed. Of course, it does have a big impact on whether or not they get reelected, which we'll talk about. So, what is presidency? If you want to be president, do you want to get to decide who lives and who dies? I mean, you have to make life and death decisions every day, and you have no private life, which reasons I would never want to be president. But a lot of people do. If you have a massive ego, you might want to be president. And frankly, let's be real here. If you run for president, you must have a massive ego because you're basically saying out of the 340 million people in the United States of America, I believe I am the best person to lead the country. Your ego has to have its own zip code, I think, to think that. And this is not a slide of anyone who's run for president, because this is true of everybody who considers running for president. Anyway, so what is the presidency and why do we have it? Well, presidency is established by Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Famously, Harry Truman, he became president when Franklin Roosevelt died in office. Truman told reporters that it felt like the moon, stars, and planets had fallen on me. Boys, if you ever pray, pray for me now, as he put it. We want the president to be strong, but we also want them to be restrained. Too much power of the presidency, and it becomes more like a dictatorship. Too little power, and they're not able to get much done or accomplish much. So obviously, again, it's kind of a paradox here. It goes back to the problem of how much order versus how much order do we want to have? How much do we want to restrain our government? But we also want our government to do the things we want it to do. So this is kind of the paradox of the presidency. Public opinion of a president can be a roller coaster. If you look at it over time, typically most presidents, when they first take office, are generally popular. Approval ratings of up in the 50s, 60s, sometimes even higher than that. Over time, approval ratings tend to decline. Sometimes they bounce back and go up again. Sometimes they don't. And if they do bounce and go back up again, sometimes they go down again. So point being that it's like a roller coaster. It can be pretty, how a president's viewed can change a lot from 1 week to the next, 1 month to the next, 1 year to the next. All right. You want to be president? There are really only 3 qualifications you have to meet. And by 3, I mean 4. Well, the fourth one is kind of maybe 3.5 would be the actual answer here. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution states president must be, quote, a natural born citizen. They must be at least 35 years of age, and they have to have been a resident of the United States for the previous 14 years. So what does this mean? Well, the second 2 are pretty obvious, I think. There's not much debate on what that means. Natural born citizen, we talked about this before, probably, and again, the courts have never ruled on this, so because no one has ever been elected who wasn't born in the United States that we're aware of, but probably what that means is that you have to be a citizen from the time you're born. So yes, you're born in the United States, you are a natural born U.S. citizen. If you were born in another country, you are a natural born citizen if at least one of your parents was a U.S. citizen. So it is probably possible to be born outside the United States and become president. Again, we can't say this with 100% certainty because no one ever has, and courts don't rule on hypotheticals. So we'll have to wait for it happens before the courts will give us an actual ruling. Those are the three hard qualifications to be president. 22nd Amendment says that you are limited to 2 terms in office or 10 years. 2 terms obviously would be 8 years, but what this means, but the 10 years is because if you are vice president and you assume the presidency with 2 years or less left in the previous president's term, you're eligible for 2 terms of your own. If you assume the presidency with more than 2 years left, then you're only eligible for 1 term. So the absolute maximum someone could serve would be 10 years. And I say this as a qualification here. That means if you have served 2 terms as president, you are ineligible. So to be eligible, you have to not have previously served. 12th Amendment states the vice president must meet the same qualifications as the president. So vice president also has to be a natural born citizen, 35 years of age or older, and a resident of the U.S. for the last 14 years. And I say can't be from the same state, which is technically, it's not exact, doesn't exactly say that. It does say, though, that electors can't cast 2 votes can't vote for 2 people from the same state. So if you are president and you choose a running mate from the same state as you would be forfeiting some electoral votes, which in practice, nobody would do that. So that means that effectively you can't be from the same state. There are workarounds for this, like you could just establish residency in another state. I think this is what Cheney did. Bush chose Cheney as his running mate. Cheney lived in Texas, but he's originally from Wyoming. He'd lived in Texas for years, but he moved his residency back to Wyoming, and therefore he was eligible. So it's not much of a barrier. If you really want someone from the same state, you can do it. All right. So what is the line of succession? President. If something happens to the president, who takes over? Well, the vice president. President dies in office, is impeached, or resigns, or becomes incapacitated, then the vice president assumes the duties. After the vice president, if something happens, the president and vice president, Speaker of the House is next. After that, it's President pro tempore of the Senate. After that, it works through the cabinet secretaries, beginning with Secretary of State, then Secretary of the Treasury, then Defense, then Attorney General, then Interior, then Agriculture, then Commerce, then Labor, then Health and Human Services, then Housing and Urban Development, then Transportation, then Energy, then Education, then Veterans Affairs, then Homeland Security. These are in order of the years that these departments were established. So Homeland Security is last because the Department of Homeland Security was the last federal department established. Background experience. There is no career track to follow if you want to be president. Probably the most common route is governorship. If you're governor of a state, particularly a large state and particularly a swing state, then this is probably the way that's going to set you up best to run for president. But many presidents don't come this route at all. In fact, most of the recent ones have not. Vice presidency is another way to the presidency. As a vice president, though, you're kind of hitching your wagon to whoever the president is. If they end up leaving office popular, then you are probably going to be considered a front runner to become president afterwards. If they leave office unpopular, then it's going to work to your disadvantage. We also, members of Congress run for president sometimes, senators sometimes, less often House members. The last presidents we've had, obviously, Trump was never held elected office or any kind of government position before he was elected president. Biden was vice president under Obama, and before that, he was a senator. Obama was a senator before Obama was the first senator elected president since JFK. Before Obama, it was Bush, who was governor of Texas. Before Bush, it was Clinton, who was governor of Arkansas. Before Clinton, it was George H.W. Bush, who was who was vice president under Reagan and former director of the CIA. Reagan had been governor of California. Carter, before him, had been governor of Georgia. Ford had been vice president briefly under Nixon, and before that had been in the House of Representatives. Nixon had been vice president under Eisenhower, and before that, he had been a senator from California. Johnson had been vice president under JFK, and that's how he assumed the presidency. Before that, he'd been senator. Kennedy had been senator. Eisenhower had been a general in the army before he became president. And we can keep going back. Point is, there's a whole lot of ways you can get to the presidency. Which means there is no clear career track to follow. If you want to be president, you kind of have to make your own way, I guess you could say. And that is where we're going to stop now. Next, we're going to come back and talk about the roles of the presidency and the tasks presidents are expected to do. So we will be back shortly. Have a good day.